Okay, so you left San Francisco and you returned to Oak Ridge, and once again you started your own studio. Is that correct?
Yes. This was Oak Ridge. During the wartime, Oak Ridge was a fenced city, and you had to have a pass to get into it. And there were guard gates at all four corners of the city. And one of these was called Elza Gate. This was out at the east end of Oak Ridge. And there was a little community there that called Elza. And we found my brother and I found a little low-rent I believe at one time it had been a motorcycle shop. It had a concrete floor. It was a concrete block building. And I said, well, this will be a great place to start a holography studio because it's away from traffic and it's on a concrete floor and we can live here. You know, Tennessee, there's not a lot of regulations about where you can live and whatever, so a lot of freedom here. So
still to this day?
Yeah, it's becoming less so, but it's a very free environment where I live.
I was just in Knoxville 2 years ago, almost to the day.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. This was the low-rent section of Oak Ridge, so I named this studio Baltic after the property on the Monopoly board. It's the equivalent low-rent property.
Hey, I've had a few times playing Monopoly where Baltic actually saved my rear end.
And along about that time, I met a couple of guys. I met Ed Walsky and Phil Krieger, who were both designers, like industrial designers, exhibit designers, and showed them some holograms, and they got just fascinated, and we started turning away with different ideas of things that we could do, and we decided that we would, about this time, the multiplex holograms were coming online. And when I saw that first KISS hologram with Pam Brazier, I had yet another visual orgasm. I mean, my whole body went rigid, and I can't describe the feeling I got from seeing that. And I think I had a copy of that, and I showed that to them, and it had the exact same reaction with them. We were just smitten with the whole idea. So at that time, there was a museum. There still is a museum here in Oak Ridge about the atomic energy program, and we decided we'd present these holograms to the museum and suggest an exhibit. And they were equally smitten with them, and so we worked for some time. Unfortunately, the whole deal fell through largely because the multiplex company was unable to protect they had no distribution program, no channel program for selling holograms, and it was just sort of a free agent kind of thing, and so the deal for us fell apart. But we were able to show a lot of holograms around and got the community kind of excited about that. And it was gratifying to me because that initial demonstration that I'd seen way back in 1963, some of those same folks came to see the holograms at Baltic in 1975 or 76. So it kind of came full circle, and that was gratifying. But also at that time, I had been working for a company that was involved in medical imaging using radionuclides, and this is a technique that's used even today to help physicians visualize problems in your body by what they do is they give you a radioactive isotope of a chemical that your body normally would uptake anyway. For instance, iodine. Okay. Iodine is taken up by your thyroid, and they can give you a radioisotope of iodine, and your thyroid will take that up, and then they can form an image of that based on the gamma rays that are emitted by the radioisotope. So I had gotten fairly familiar with the physical principles of all this. I'm certainly not a scientist or anything, but I had a good understanding of what was going on there. And it was just a short step to say, well, gosh, we could combine holography with this radioisotope imaging, and then the physician, instead of having to look at flat pieces of film, could see an actual 3D visualization of, say, your thyroid, or perhaps you had some kind of a brain tumor problem or something, that you could actually see it in 3D.
Oh, what exactly provided the exposure, assuming there was an exposure onto like a silver halide material or something?
Well, the way this works is that they used, at that time, and this was just before CAT scans and PET scans came online, they used what was called an anger scintillation camera. And this camera had a great big crystal of what amounts to salt. It was sodium iodide. Well, sodium iodide is sensitive to gamma radiation. If a gamma ray strikes a sodium iodide crystal that's been properly treated, it gives off a photon. And so essentially what you're doing is you're transforming from a gamma ray to a visible photon, and you can capture that on an oscilloscope or on a display screen.
Yeah.
So what I did was I went down and talked to the local hospital and the radiologist down there, and talked to some other folks that had a what they call a phantom head, or a Alderson Phantom, it was called. That's a mock-up of a head that you can fill with radioisotope. And I went around and this is something that I've done all my life, sort of skunk works type stuff, and begged, borrowed, and assembled all this equipment. And I set up an Airflex camera on the oscilloscope. So I manually rotated this phantom in front of the anger camera, and then recorded each image off the oscilloscope with the Airflex. And so I wound up with 100, 200 feet of film, which I then sent, I think it was XX film. I sent that off to Gary Adams at the Multiplex Company, and we created a hologram based on that. And it actually worked very well. You could see the head in 3 dimensions, and it had 2 fake tumors in it, and you could see the 2 fake tumors in 3 dimensions.
Huh.
And so this was shown at the Society of Nuclear Medicine, I think, in 1976, and also shown at the International Center for Photography, either in 76 or 77.
Yeah, that was a big show in New York, right?
It was, and that show was just unbelievable. That was another epiphany for me.
Yeah, someone actually, I think it would be fair to say that was a big kickoff for holography, that show.
It was. For me personally, I mean, to be able, and I have to thank Posey Jackson for putting up with this hillbilly from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and all of my bitching and whining and complaining and all that, but she got me into that show. And then the show later on, those same holograms went to Sweden and I think toured Europe. But when I got up there in the show, it was astounding what I saw. And, Lloyd was up there, Steve Benton was up there, just a lot of the big names in holography at that time attended and exhibited at that show. And one thing, I hope you don't mind me just rambling on here, but
no, go ahead.
One thing that I saw at that time was Steve Benton's reflection hologram of the train.
Oh, engine number 9.
Exactly. And once again, I just had that moment of epiphany. I just stood in front of that thing for 15 minutes. I could not believe what I was seeing. I had never seen, I'd made reflection holograms, but I'd never seen one like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't understand what he was doing that was so different than what I or any of the other folks that were doing reflection holograms, why he was getting such a high-quality image out of that. Mm-hmm. It was so bright and so clear and so noise-free. It was just unbelievable. And so I went and introduced myself to him and talked to him at length, and he explained this whole process, which just fascinated me. The idea that instead of fixing out the unexposed silver, that you actually, via a solvent-type developer, you dissolve it, and it precipitates back onto the exposed silver. So, in effect, you're amplifying the whole image. Well, I went off on a 5-year trek of making my own emulsions, of making my own developers, of experimenting with the developer that he had given me. It was just a whole episode in holography for me.
Yeah, some of those early chemical formulas weren't very good. I remember working with mercuric chloride bleach, parabenzoquinone, PBQ.
Those things were awful.
Bromine.
Yeah.
Oh.
I had all that. I had a big jar of bromine at my house, and I finally had to put it in the backyard. I dug a hole and put it in the backyard, and that's where I kept it. That stuff was awful.
Yeah. I remember. I worked with all those things in the early days, too.
And in fact, the mercuric chloride is actually called Monkhoven's intensifier, and that was actually Gabrielle Lippmann was originally used that. So that goes back to 1895, in terms of Lippmann type imaging.
Hey, your medical hologram was on display at the Museum of Holography in Chicago for a number of years, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and it disappeared. I had a business trip in 2000, and I stopped by and visited Lauren Billings up there and asked her. I'd lent it to her, many years before, and asked her what had become of it because I'd like to get it back. And she said that she didn't know what had happened to it, and so it's. I have a feeling that it's out there somewhere.
Oh, it's around, yeah.
It's somewhere.
It may be right.
I would appreciate it if any of your listeners know where it is, if they could steer me back to it.
It may be somewhere right in the museum. They'll find it.
Yeah. Of course, I have the original footage, and I also have some duplicate holograms of it, so I'm not completely without it, but I would like to get the original back.
You went to Chicago for another company right after Baltic, didn't you?
That was Holographic Arts Company.
That was a beautiful facility. I saw a picture of that on your website. That was beautiful.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was Lee Lacey and a group of investors that were associated with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. But Lee Lacey was really the guy that kind of pushed the whole idea forward. And Lee's just a brilliant guy. He knew right from the moment that he saw his first multiplex hologram, he knew that this could be applied commercially, and that what needed to be done was to set up a facility that could produce masters and then replicate them in a volume. And he had a great vision, and he had a lot of experience in the commercial photography world, so he knew where to go to assemble the necessary equipment. And of course, he worked with, he contracted with Lloyd, and Dave Schmidt, I believe, was involved in that, and Mike Kahn was involved. And,
did they produce holograms at that facility, or was that just, did they just form them out?
No, we produced them there.
Okay.
We had a fabulous setup. We had what I'm calling and you can see this on my website, was the Mark, I believe it was the Mark II or the Mark III multiplex camera that incorporated all of Lloyd's improvements to the original multiplex camera. And the thing was, of course, in typical Lloyd fashion, it was built out of particle board, which is ideal for holography because it's completely dead. You know, it's massive and it's dead. Doesn't transmit vibration very well. And
all hand built.
We also had Lee contracted with Dave Schmidt to make the copying equipment. So we had the ability to run off duplicates from the master hologram, and it was a very nice setup that David created for that. Then he also contracted with the Creonite Corporation, which builds photographic processors, and built a custom processor that I believe it was 24-inch wide. Actually, it was wider than that. It would take two strips simultaneously of 10-inch holographic film and automatically process them, and it would automatically replenish itself so that it maintained its chemical stability.
Yeah.
And he bought for mass. We had a turntable that I had built, a little turntable, and he of course had motion picture equipment, so we could shoot it, we could create the original master on the multiplex camera, and then we could run off thousands of copies.
Well, what chemistry were they running on that self-replenishing processor, automated processor?
It was D19 and stop bath and rapid fixer. It was just your very simple process, and then it went through a bleach, which I believe we were using for that was potassium ferrocyanide, and then it was of course that had problems because it was a little bit on the light sensitive side, but that's what we used, I believe, in that case.
I used to love potassium ferrocyanide bleach for transmission holograms. Yeah.
Well, I believe that's what we were using there. No, I take that back. I'm mistaken there. We used an iodine-based bleach.
Oh, really?
Actually. Yeah. And that had the advantage of it was a lot more light stable, and actually I believe it produced more efficient holograms.
Okay.
At that time, but now of course it's been a long time, so my memory's a little bit weak on that. But I believe we were using an iodine bleach there, and that of course caused problems with the processor, in that we needed to have special tanks and rollers that could withstand that iodine bleach.
Oh, okay.
For the masters, though, I believe we were using potassium ferrocyanide.
So then you wound up back in Knoxville.
Right, I worked there for a year, and we got it all set up, and everything was running fine. And I left Chicago, which is to your listeners, Chicago is just a wonderful, wonderful city. I mean, it has tremendous architecture, museums, and food, and just transportation. The place is just a wonderful place. And I came back to Knoxville, and just kind of, I'd have to say I dabbled in holography for the next, 8 or 10 years, and played around with making my own emulsions and making various apparatus. And one thing in particular I want to recount is that I noticed on your website you have a wonderful little section on making stereogram portraits.
Yeah.
And I looked through the whole thing, and I enjoyed what you come up with there. I had this idea that I ran across some lenticular lenses, and I decided, well, what I need to do is make a camera that has, a couple of dozen lenses arranged linearly, so that I can take one exposure and capture like 24 images taken from displaced over about a foot, and then convert that into a hologram, so that I could essentially accomplish what you do with a multiplex hologram in one shot. So I actually built the camera and took some exposures and and then it became ever more complex to build the rig that would transfer that to a reflection hologram.
Oh.
So I kind of that languished in my garage for years, and finally I just tore the whole thing down. But I still have that camera, which I'm kind of proud of, that it actually works. So.
Wow.
But that's an idea that any of your listeners could do. You just find yourself an array of inexpensive lenses and build yourself a little simple camera. You could do this. You could make a pinhole camera that had multiple pinholes stretched across for a foot or 2 feet, and put a piece of film back in there, and you'll have to build some little baffles in there to separate the images.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why you couldn't take that and use that to generate a master and create a multiplex hologram.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I want to give your listeners, I realize I'm rambling on here, but I want to give your listeners another little thing. Was I did a lot of experiments based on what Steve Benton had steered me toward with this, what he called intra-emulsion diffusion transfer. And basically it's a solvent-type developer. Well, I came up with a formula which I believe would probably even work with those new plates that are out there, which to make 1 liter, it would be 5 grams of Elon, and then 50 grams of sodium sulfide, 1 gram of potassium bromide, 30 grams of sodium metaborate, which serves as the buffer, and then roughly 1/10 of a gram of sodium thiocyanate, which is the solvent, and then add water to make 1 liter. And this would make a very simple, gentle-acting solvent developer, which I think would probably work well with the plates that are even out there today.
And what bleach would you match that with?
Well, at that time, I was kind of taken with that cupric, was it cupric bromide? It was one of those bleaches like that that was floating around out there that worked pretty well. And then, of course, there was Steve's developer, which also used the thiocyanate for the solvent, but he added in ascorbic acid, which not only is a developer, but also is a solvent-type developer. And as a little sideline, I tried this out. I went to the drugstore and bought some vitamin C, and then I went to the grocery store and bought some Red Devil Lye and mixed the two together in proportions, and it actually worked out pretty well as a developer.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Huh.
You got to be careful with that lye, but it had the property of getting the pH way up, and the ascorbic acid served as a developing agent. It probably would work better if it had a buffer in it like the sodium metaborate, but by itself it seemed to work okay.
Isn't that something? There's some tips. So tell us what you're doing now as we get ready to close out. We're coming up on 25 minutes again.
Okay. Well, I have a wide range of interests. I draw, paint. I'm a photographer, and I'm also involved heavily with the iPix Corporation, and we make the 360-degree immersive imaging that you've seen a lot of that in the real estate business for home tours where you can surf completely around the whole room.
Yeah.
But we've also applied this now to Homeland Security for video purposes.
Oh, I see.
We have 360-degree video, and I've been involved with these folks for about 5 years now, and it's just a terrific experience. So I continue with my long-term interest in the imaging. And after visiting your site, Frank, I can't help but say that I got to get my laser diode pointer out and get to making holograms again, because it's just terrific what you have up there.
Well, thank you very much. Once you're inoculated with holography, I don't think it ever comes out of the bloodstream.
I don't think it does either.
No, it doesn't. Well, John, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I know this was a long interview, but I think it was worth every second that the clock ticked by having you on the show, and I very much appreciate you coming on and taking the time, and I'm sure the listeners do as well.
Well, I appreciate it to you, and I'd like to say hello to all your listeners, and thank you for inviting me on the show. And I think your Holo World site is just a great service to the holographic community, and I appreciate all the hard work that you put into it again. And I'd encourage folks to get up there and listen to some of these interviews because they're as fresh today as when they were originally recorded. Just terrific stuff. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John.
All right.
Have a good night.
Man.
Bye.
See you.